Hey y'all, my name is Lexi, this is Ludo, and today we're going to be talking about the true story behind the Exorcism of Emily Rose. If you don't know what the Exorcism of Emily Rose is, it is a movie. It's a movie about Aaron Bruner, who is a lawyer who takes on the case of Father Richard Moore, who is a Catholic priest being tried for the death of a young girl, Emily Rose. Emily Rose was a college student who suffered from delusions and catatonia. After medications proved to be useless, the family decides to contact a priest, Father Moore, to do exorcisms in which she wouldn't survive, thus the trial. I remember watching this movie when it first came out back in 2006. I remember my friend's mom, who was like a second parent to me at the time, she, after watching the movie, showing us all the audio tapes and the pictures from Anneliese Michel, because this was actually a really big trial. And if you know about exorcism, I'm sure you've heard of Anneliese Michel, because it's one of the only trials where they went to court and sued the priest for killing Anneliese. I remember seeing all the audio and video footages from Anneliese and being so convinced that she was possessed. And now, 15 or so years later, I have different opinions. So if you don't believe in exorcisms, stick around. If you do believe in exorcisms, stick around. Either way, I think it's an interesting conversation. So editing me, I was just reviewing and I saw that I'm looking down at my laptop a lot. This has a lot of notes that go along with it, and I have a problem of diverting from the topic that I'm talking about. So I more or less wrote a script so I can hit all of my main points, because there's so much to talk about in this topic. I wanted to get everything. I'm sorry if that's annoying. I think it's annoying too. I'm sorry. Anneliese Michel was born on September 21st, 1952 in West Germany to very religious parents, Joseph and Anna. She had 3 sisters and 3 aunts who all were nuns. Friends and family would describe Anneliese as loving, happy, religious, and very empathetic. Her parents remembered her sleeping on the floor when she found out that homeless people often have to do that. So she's clearly an empath. She clearly takes on other people's pain and suffering in a very personal way. Joseph, Anneliese's father, grew up in a very religious house as well. He was being raised to be a priest, but he had a hard time with Latin in school and ended up going to a trade school instead. Joseph took over the family business, which was a sawmill right down the street from where the family was living. Anna, Anneliese's mother, would spend a lot of time with Joseph at the sawmill doing work for them. Because of this, Anneliese and her sisters often were with her grandparents growing up, who were all really religious as well, and would have her kind of follow in those same footsteps. Joseph and Anna, they ran a pretty strict nuclear religious Roman Catholic house. So every Sunday the family would go to church. They would pray every morning and before bed. They even celebrated the 13th of every single month for Our Lady of Fatima, I think is how you pronounce it. Anneliese spent much of her younger years sick. Before the age of 5, she had already gotten mumps, measles, and scarlet fever, but her true reign of terror didn't start until she turned 16. That's when she was sitting with her friend, Mary Louise, in school, and Anneliese lost consciousness. Her eyes completely glazed over. She began walking around as if she was hypnotized. When she came out of it, Anneliese and Mary Louise just kind of laughed it off and thought that Anneliese was tired. That night, around midnight, Anneliese's body began to convulse. There was parts of her body that would twitch when other parts would stay completely still. When her body stopped convulsing, she went into a total catatonic state, and said that it felt almost like there was a pressure pulling or pushing down on top of her. It was pushing down on her so hard to the point that she had a hard time breathing and actually ended up wetting the bed. When she called out for help, she found her tongue was totally useless and she wasn't able to get any words out. This lasted only for a few minutes, and then when she woke up from it, the only thing that was really left was wet sheets. So she got out, changed the linen, and went back to bed somehow. The next morning, she confided in her mother. Her mom was a little concerned, but since it was an isolated event, she wasn't too concerned, and Anneliese just stayed home from school. Nothing happened. She was feeling totally back to normal. Suddenly, she went back to school. And about a year after the first event, on August 24th, 1969, Anneliese had another experience where she had a blackout during the day, followed by a night from pure hell. She woke up late in the evening, finding herself paralyzed, her arms totally stiff, and again unable to speak and having a really hard time breathing. And like the first attack, within minutes it was all over, and Anneliese just changed the bed linen, went back to sleep, and again confided in her mother in the morning. Now that this was the second time that she's had this happen to her, her mom was a little more concerned. So they went to their family physician, Dr. Vaught, who immediately referred them to a neurologist, Dr. Luthi. The neurologist took a lot of tests, including an EEG, and didn't seem to find anything of concern. So Dr. Luthi believed that Anneliese was suffering from some cerebral seizures with symptom of grand mal epilepsy, but wasn't too concerned since she'd only had 2 seizures and they were a year apart. So he didn't prescribe her any medication at this time. After the second seizure, she didn't quite bounce back like she did before. She was always sick and she complained of a sore throat. This led to her getting her tonsils removed, and then in turn caused Anneliese to get pleurisy and pneumonia. This poor girl. She was so sick that she ended up having to stop going to school. In January of 1970, Anneliese was admitted to a hospital for the tuberculosis and pneumonia. And on February 28th, she was moved to a specialized clinic for young people with bronchial and lung disease. It was here that the doctors found problems with her circulatory and heart system. At this clinic, Anneliese would spend more time praying than usual and became even more religious and devout in her studies. The other kids saw her as an outsider and would often make fun of her, calling her snot nose. Keep a mental note of that. They would call her snot nose among other names. On June 3rd, she had her third seizure at the clinic. This time again, she was walking around in a dazed state, and then she would suffer from stiffness in the arms, breath, voice being taken away, pressure on her body, urine in the sheets. After this event, though, the kids who were already making fun of her, calling her snot nose and other names, were now saying that she was possessed. They didn't really think that she was possessed. They were just making fun of her. They knew she was very religious, and kids are mean. Because of this episode, she was sent back to Dr. Luthi on June 16th, where they, by the way, I'm going to be mentioning a lot of doctors' names. It's going to be hard to keep up. It's not really that important. It's just important to know that she was going to see a doctor. She went to see a lot of different doctors. But because of this episode, she was sent to Dr. Luthi on June 16th, where they found irregular wave patterns in the brain. So Dr. Luthi then prescribed her an anticonvulsant drug. For 6 weeks, Anneliese stayed at the clinic until August 11th, when the doctors finally allowed her to go home after taking another EEG and finding nothing wrong. As soon as she returned, her sisters noticed a drastic change in her attitude, and she was much moodier than before. In September 1973, Anneliese told Dr. Luthi that she had been seeing faces often and described them as frazen. There's not a direct translation, but it roughly translates to a hideous grimace faces, and she was stopped praying because when she did, she would see the faces. She also told the doctor that the devil was inside of her, and later said a judgment of fire will be upon everyone. The images of horrid faces only got worse and worse, to the point that she was always terrified and got severely depressed. In the fall of 1973, Anneliese related to a doctor that she was smelling this horrible odor that smelled like a burning fecal matter, which I've never smelled the smell of dead bodies, but having done a lot of research on this, kind of topic. I know that that's often how dead bodies are described to smell like. She also heard voices in her head telling her that she was damned to hell, which is a devoted Christian's biggest fear, and formed a diversion to beloved symbols of her faith like the cross. Anneliese was being referred to doctor, and nobody was able to find an issue. Eventually, her primary physician prescribed her an anticonvulsant, though there isn't much proof that she took this for very long. In June 1972, Anneliese had another seizure, and in September they revisited Dr. Luthi. Another EEG was taken, and again they found nothing wrong. This time though, they did prescribe her with a Dilaton, and despite finding nothing wrong. Dilaton is often used to treat grand mal epilepsy as well as psychomotive seizures. Anneliese and Anna were getting pretty exhausted of the back and forth and were desperate for answers, and Anneliese's sickness was only getting worse. She would suffer from abscences as well as becoming stiff in odd poses. Dr. Luthi believed her seizures were being depressed due to the medications, even though the absences, stiffness, rancid smell, and gory faces were only getting worse. Anneliese was becoming hopeless and confided in her father about the faces and said that she heard voices telling her that she was damned. Joseph tried to calm her down, saying it was all due to the epilepsy and with medication in time, she'll be getting better. So while Joseph was putting a lot of his faith in doctors and medication, Anna was starting to kind of question that. She one day saw Anneliese standing in front of the Blessed Virgin Mary statue that they have in their house. Anna describes her as having a face full of malice and her eyes being completely black. In April, Anneliese was diagnosed with German measles and as a result found another new doctor. Despite missing so much school and being constantly sick, haunted, and severely depressed, Anneliese took her school exams and passed. Joseph, trying to cheer Anneliese up and celebrating her passing her exams, scheduled a trip to San Damiano. Once there, Anneliese found herself not able to enter the shrine, saying that the soil underneath her feet burned like hellfire. She also couldn't look at holy pictures or any of the sacramentals because they shined so brightly that she thought she might go blind. When they tried to offer her holy water from the shrine, she was unable to drink it, and when she tried, she said it burnt. When she was trying to get inside and looking at people praying, she said that they all turned to her and gnashed their teeth in rage. Joseph bought her a medal from the shrine. When he went to put it on Anneliese, she said that it would press up against her to the point that she was unable to breathe. The guide on their trip, Thea, was also wearing one of these medals, and Anneliese tore it from her neck by grabbing the outside of her dress and pulling. Anneliese also had knocked Thea down while trying to get on the bus to go back home, causing Thea to break her rosary. On the bus ride, Anneliese was also not being like herself and saying really crude words and just making fun of Thea. She's also said to be saying these words in a low, manly voice. She's also said to be releasing the smell that only she herself was smelling, and everyone on the bus was able to smell the rancid odor. Thea and Anneliese became friends despite everything that happened. Anneliese would later tell Thea of visions she saw of Jesus and Mother Mary, and how they would talk about how Anneliese was a saint and that there would be a time in the world where people would talk of the devil and of hell. Thea thinks that that's what happened with her death and the trial following her death, and videos like this talking about it. On September 3rd, 1973, Anneliese made another appointment with Dr. Luthi. Anna and Joseph claim at this appointment Dr. Luthi suggested contacting a Jesuit, though later under oath, Dr. Luthi swears that he would never say this. Regardless, Anneliese met with Father Habiger and Father Roth. After explaining the whole story, Dr. Habiger said Anneliese was a shy, well-mannered girl and should continue seeking medical attention. Father Adolf Roderick, who was an expert in possessions, was then contacted by Thea. He asked for a written record of the events. Upon reading it, he did see some signs of possession. Due to his old age, he didn't feel that he was the one to carry out the exorcism. exorcisms. He suggested Father Herman. After meeting with Father Herman 10 times over a 18-month period, he would say that Anneliese was a nice, extremely religious girl who, again, should continue seeking medical attention. Father Roth confided in Father Alt about a young girl visiting a shrine and becoming possessed. Father Alt was fascinated by the story and felt a connection to Anneliese, and eventually they would meet up. He recalled Anneliese being very pale and stern. Father Roth and Father Alt both questioned her and concluded that there were some signs of possession. In the fall of 1973, things started looking up for Anneliese, and she registered for college. She was to be majoring in education and theology, and she was feeling very hopeful. During this time, it's believed that she was not taking her medication and was putting all of her faith into God. She had regular meetings with Father Alt and would tell him she was still being haunted by horrible faces, and she started acting compulsively, doing 400 to 500 squats in a day and an equal amount of genuflections in a day. It was around this time that she met Peter while attending a school dance. They found love, and after some time, Anneliese would confide in Peter about the faces that she was seeing. In November 1973, Peter and Anneliese went to see Dr. Lehner. After talking with Anneliese, Dr. Lehner felt Anneliese suffered from neurosis caused by a domineering father and a mother who she hated due to strict religious views. He also suggested epilepsy was the cause of her seizures, and the next day Anneliese went to have an EEG, which showed irregular patterns in the left temporal area of her brain. The doctor then changed her medication from Diatin to Tregitol. Like Diatin, Tregitol has a long list of side effects, including fatigue, nausea, and dizziness. Since Tregitol affects the blood, it suggested that blood tests be taken in the beginning to monitor any problems, and there was no proof that any of these tests were taken. While all this was going on, Father Alt was trying to sanction an exorcism. You would think that any priest could do an exorcism, but there's actually strict criteria within the Roman Catholic Church, one of which was that a demon has to be possession of her body, which didn't seem to be the case. Father Alt did at this time ask the bishop to allow him to perform solemn exorcisms, since the only relief that Anneliese was seemingly getting was from prayer, but the bishop refused. After the next 4 months, Anneliese continued going to doctors and continued getting EEGs done, which all showed that she was slowly getting better and should continue taking medication. June 1975, Anneliese, her sister, and Peter went to see Father Alt to tell him that she was no longer in control of her own body. She began throwing things at Peter and her sisters and would have screaming fits. Soon after, Father Alt went to check on Anneliese and found her in a complete state of despair. He started praying the rosary, but Anneliese was unable to finish, tears streaming down her face. Father Alt at this time began silently saying an exorcism to himself. Anneliese immediately stopped in her tracks, tearing the rosary to bits. Peter arrived later that night, and Anneliese told him in a deep, guttural voice to get out. On his way out, Father Alt found a crumpled piece of paper that Anneliese had written that read, "I am a sinner. I have clearly recognized that in the chapel today, even if I imagine something different, I am. I have no courage, despaired, grievously injured. Through the years, I no longer defend myself. The worst of it is that I have no choice anymore. I see that sometimes like lightning. Hopelessness sits at the root where my life is. It has become a conditioned pride, unspeakable pride that will set me free. When I speak, my heart does not speak alone." So Anneliese's condition was not looking good. She had removed a picture of Jesus she had hanging in her room and had stopped going to mass altogether, saying that she couldn't get past the entrance. But she was always stiff and had a hard time walking, often grabbing onto chairs and tables to support her weight. She wasn't sleeping due to being terrified, and she could no longer do the thing that brought her the most joy, praying. Father Alt came to visit Anneliese, and he recounts in the trial, saying the living room was filled with a horrible stench that penetrated everything. Anneliese, when he walked in, came running towards him and stopped abruptly, completely stiff and silent. After a few seconds, she ran away and then came back doing the same thing again, but this time stopping in a rigid posture. After this, she began screaming for Father Roth to get out and then ripped the rosary to pieces. When the father tried to bless her, Anneliese went into a fit of rage and attempted to throw a jug of holy water at the father, but it slipped. Anna was getting very concerned since Anneliese was now unable to walk. She asked Peter if she could take Anneliese for a ride, hoping to lighten her spirits. Peter and Anna helped Anneliese into the car and they drove, eventually stopping for a short walk. Anneliese ended up wandering away in her trance-like state and then dropping to the ground completely stiff. She remained this way for about 10 minutes. No matter how hard Peter would try to get her attention, she was not responsive. Suddenly, she jumped up exclaiming that I could walk, look at me, I'm free. Anneliese said that the Blessed Virgin Mary had visited her and freed her. She later tells her mother that the Virgin Mary had said it was a great suffering for my heart that so many souls are lost. It is necessary to do penance for priests, for the youth, and for your country. Would you do penance for these souls so that not so many are lost? And she was told that she had 3 days to consider. During those 3 days, she said that it was the best she felt in her entire life. Joseph and Anna were very scared and did not want Anneliese to tell the Virgin Mary that she would do this, but Anneliese had made up her mind. I mean, she was always a devout Christian and she was always empathetic, so there's no way that she's going to let other people to suffer when she could be the one that does it. Anneliese's condition only got worse and worse. She was lucky to get 2 hours of sleep in a night, and she was often in a trance-like state doing countless genuflections. She would run around the house screaming, and then after a while she would freeze and then collapse and remain frozen for several days at a time. She couldn't eat solid foods and eventually had a hard time breathing, always feeling like there was a pressure on her chest. Anneliese would urinate on the kitchen floor and often lick it up, according to reports. She was also reported chewing on underwear that she had urinated in, like gum. She'd rip pictures off the wall, tore rosary to bits, and even shattered a crucifix. While solid foods were an issue, she didn't seem to have a problem eating flies and spiders. There was also seemingly supernatural things that would happen around the house, like swarms of flies would appear and then disappear. Parents recalled seeing shadowy figures that would dart across from Anneliese. One day, Anneliese was under a table barking like a dog. She spent 2 whole days this way until finally they contacted Thea, who instructed 3 times that Anneliese get out in the name of the Blessed Trinity, and then Anneliese did, like nothing was wrong. Peter, Anneliese's sister, Roswitha, and her parents took shifts to make sure Anneliese didn't hurt herself, but were getting completely exhausted. They contacted Father Roderick. On September 1975, Father Roderick made his way to see Anneliese. When he arrived, he saw Anneliese on the floor canaton, which he saw as a symptom of possession. Father Roderick asked the Michels to bring Anneliese onto the couch and have her sit. The father also stated that at this time she did not look emancipated. Anneliese was asked what her name was, and then in a low, guttural voice, she answered Judas. The father felt he had all the information he needed and went to leave. On his way out, Anneliese slapped him. When he was walking past the house on his way to his car, he said that Anneliese started playing the piano as if nothing had just happened. In Father Roderick's eyes, she was clearly possessed. She had revealed the demon's name, was showing an aversion to holy items, and a fear of exorcism. Fathers Alt, Roderick, Roth, and Habiger would all meet to talk about Anneliese's condition and decided to finally ask the bishop for permission to do the exorcisms. The fathers call in a well-respected priest to do the exorcisms, and now with Father Rince involved, the bishop allowed the exorcisms to commence. On September 21st, the first exorcism happened. Father Rince, Anneliese's two sisters, her parents, Peter, and fathers Alt Herman and Roth all shuffled into Anneliese's bedroom, where there was a makeshift altar by her bedside. Everything before the session seemed totally normal. Anneliese was laughing and joking around with everyone, up until Father Rince made the sign of the cross over her and sprayed holy water on her. Her body began to tremble and she seemed to be in a fit of rage. Joseph and Peter had pulled down Anneliese, who began kicking and attempting to bite anyone who came near her while she was howling and screaming. She would repeat, "Put that shit away," when referring to the holy water. Anneliese later would say that she had no control over her body and that she was just looking at things through a window but had no say in what her body was doing. This first exorcism lasted around 3.5 hours. After the first session, with Anneliese's permission, they began recording sessions. Everyone who was involved was convinced of Anneliese's possession. They believed the exorcism was all they needed and pretty much know at this point she was not taking medication. She was putting full faith in the church. It's also believed that she stopped taking medications much earlier than this point. The audio tapes from the exorcisms have been transcribed and are kind of chilling to listen to. I'm not gonna lie, although I don't personally believe this is a possession, they are definitely scary to listen to. If you do believe in demons and such alike, then you should know, or you should at least assume, that demons lie or would do anything or say anything to get you to do what they want. If you do believe in demons, take it with a grain of salt that this is what they said.
Vater der Lüge, sage die volle Wahrheit.
Von den anderen Partei.
Was ist mit der anderen?
Ja, der ist. Oh, dabei haben sie selber die wahre Lehre. Oh, die sind ja so. Oh.
Meinst du die Protestanten?
Ja. Ich die Katholiken. Und vor allem die oben, die eine Hure benehmen. Sie laufen den anderen nach, die Waffen.
So that's some of the audio clip, and though you can't really make out what they're saying, it's been transcribed. On September 29th, 1975, Lucifer spoke through Anneliese, saying, "The snot nose," remember that from earlier, "the snot nose is cursed. I will not free her. We are so many inside her. The snotty slut is ours. You have to pray much more." They went on to say the possession would last around 1.5 years, and how standing while giving communion pleases the demons. It's important to also note that around this time the Roman Catholic Church was shifting from traditional ideas to more libertarian ideas and kind of moving away from possessions as a literal thing and looking at them more as like a mental health thing. They were stopping giving church sermons in Latin and started doing them in German, and they stopped giving communion directly to the mouth. They started doing hand to mouth, which for traditional Roman Catholics, they saw this as the devil's way of giving communion. During one session, Anneliese grabbed Thea by the throat, and it took 3 men to get her off. Thea remembers the event, saying, quote, "She had the strength of a bear. Yeshua is a delicate thing. You can imagine the strength she had. I thought she was going to strangle me," end quote. Another session, Father Rince brought in 3 unmarked glasses of water, 2 of which contained holy water from 2 different shrines. Anneliese picked the one from San Dominio, saying San Dominio shit water, and then drank from the tap water. An important part of getting rid of demons is getting names of said demons. So Father Rince tried relentlessly to get names, but they weren't giving in, saying things like, "I'm not leaving," or "She belongs to me," in response. Eventually, he would receive those names in order, the first one being Judas, then Lucifer, then former Roman Emperor Nero, then Cain from the Bible, Hitler, and Fleshman, who is a disgraced fallen priest. Jesus would speak through her the most during these exorcisms, though all would use Anneliese's voice. Tones and mannerisms were different depending on the demon, so you can tell who was talking. For example, Lucifer spoke in a very majestic way and was very intelligent in the way he spoke, whereas Hitler barked when he spoke and he had in a heavy Australian accent. The demons talked often about how people no longer believed in religious books or the positive effects of prayer. Lucifer spoke through her once saying, quote, "Today nobody believes any longer in Immaculate Conception. Giving of communion in the hand is my work. The bishops are foolish to believe the theologians rather than the Pope." And one of the spirits that was in her was Barbara Weisgand. This is pretty interesting to me because she wasn't a bad person. In fact, she was esteemed in the church's eyes. She believed in the same traditional views that Anneliese and her family did. So Anneliese was actually a really big fan of hers, and she spent a lot of her time reading a lot of Barbara's works. Father Roderick and Father Habiger arrived on October 6th, and when they did, Father Habiger was completely disturbed by Anneliese's state. He asked Father Roderick if demons can kill Anneliese, and Roderick says that it hasn't happened before and that the will power of God prevents it from happening. On October 13th, 1975, which is the anniversary date of the last apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Fatima, it's not really important to know what these dates are, it's just important to note religious dates. On that day, Anneliese communicated with Mother. The Mother of God told Anneliese that she would be freed on Halloween and that Judgment Day is nearing. On October 22nd, Lucifer wrote through Anneliese, "We shall soon leave her. The one up there is expelling us. We are eternally damned. We also want to go up there. We do not want to go out. We shall continue to torment the snot-nose." Father Vince asked Lucifer, "Can we still save many souls with our prayers?" Where then Lucifer replies, "Yes, also the hardened ones. But then penance has to be done, especially you should adopt a way of living according to Nazarene." Barbara Weisgand preached this often. A couple of days later, Lucifer then writes, "You should preach more. You should warn people of the dangers of the world without God." On October 29th, Mother Mary said, "During an exorcism on Friday, I will come out and chase them away." On Halloween, they all prepared for the long-awaited day. This exorcism was a very long one. Throughout the session, it seemed that all the demons were being drawn out, while Anneliese was throwing up, screaming, making horrible sounds.
Maria, dem Kinderling, allen deinen Segen gilt.
So, jetzt lassen dich in Ruhe.
Ja, Nero.
Eucharistischer Heiland ist mächtiger Geduld. Der Erzähl ist die Jungfrau ist mächtiger.
Was die Rotten anzuschauen, alles von mir.
Im Namen des dreifaltigen Gottes sagt die Wahrheit. Im Namen des dreifaltigen Gottes befehle ich dir, sagt die Wahrheit. Im Namen des dreifaltigen Gottes und aller größten Jungfrau Maria, sagt die Wahrheit.
After some silence, Anneliese speaks and says, "I am completely free, now completely free." They started saying their final hymn when a guttural voice came from Anneliese saying, "I have not gone out yet." When Father Rince asked who still remained, it was revealed to be an unnamed demon, one that they didn't know was there all along. After trying to expel the demons, they decided to end the session at 1:30, which was much later than their usual, and they now believe that there was a total of 10 demons inside of Anneliese. Anneliese was feeling better, but knew it was short-lived and it wasn't over. They held another exorcism on November 4th that had little results. More exorcisms were then held on the 10th, 16th, 17th, and 23rd of November, all of which were uneventful. Sessions continued on December 7th, 12th, 14th, 19th, and 30th. Again, uneventful. And during this time, Anneliese was continuing working on her thesis for college. In the December 19th session, Father Rin spoke to Lucifer saying, quote, "We are damned for eternity. Out, out. We wish to come out of the snot nose. We are damned." Father Rinson commands them to come out, and Lucifer states, "We cannot because he does not allow it. The one up there, the one does not want it. he wants us to remain. The exorcisms were getting less eventful, and it became harder to communicate with the devils. They became harder to communicate with the demons. On Ash Wednesday, Anneliese traveled back to school, where she found herself unable to return home. Friends found Anneliese catatonic on the floor and extremely ill. Joseph, Anna, and Roswitha came to Anneliese. Roswitha decided to stay and help take care of her. Father Rintz later arrives, where he found Anneliese nearly unconscious and unresponsive to his exorcisms. Anneliese said the demons were fighting amongst themselves on who can take full possession. Anneliese afterwards was feeling better and continued her studies. She attempted to travel a few days later, but her body went totally stiff and she was not able to move. Thea picked her up and took her back to her house. It was at this time that Anneliese asked Thea if she would protect her and never allow a doctor to be called. Anneliese said that the medicine wasn't helping, only prayer was, and she didn't want to be sent to an insane asylum. Thea promised and took her back. One of Anneliese's biggest fear was being committed to a mental institution, as that would affect her likelihood of becoming a teacher. The demons would play on this fear in her head and tell her that it was their wish for her to be committed, because then she would be away from the help of the priests, and she would very likely die there, and nobody would know of her suffering and know of her sainthood. So pretty much everything she was doing would be pointless. Anneliese went to a chapel to pray one night. After a while, she went to leave the chapel, but every time she stood, she would collapse back down to her knees, eventually causing them to bleed. It wasn't until the morning that she found herself able to finally leave. Soon after that, Anneliese went again to pray at church, where she broke into an intense sweat. That same night, she ended up laying catatonic on the floor, completely unable to sleep. Anneliese spent the whole day after that praying, and then at 3 p.m. went to Good Friday services. Hours after the service, a friend of Anneliese found her still at the church, her eyes closed, and she was clenching her prayer book in her hands. She was completely unresponsive, and so her friend went to find Peter and brought him back to the church, where she was in the exact same position. Peter, again, was not able to get her out of this catatonic state, so he decided to stay praying until she was responsive. The next day, Anneliese was exhausted and unable to move without any assistance. She remained in this semi-conscious state for around 2 weeks. On April 3rd, Anneliese began to scream in the middle of the night, so she was sent to the parish house, where she would be closer to Father Alt and hopefully get some peace and quiet to work on her thesis. Anneliese did well at the parish house for a short time, but soon after arriving, she began moaning and screaming for hours. She wouldn't be able to eat, and she would lie on the floor totally stiff and oftentimes contorted. Anneliese was continuously tormented, and in February, Anneliese told Father Alt, "I know what will happen. I know the summer will be hard and terrible, and I know I will not survive. No one can tell me different. I will not survive." When Anneliese wasn't feeling ill, she would laugh and smile and act like a normal girl, and this fired a lot of people around her. Eventually, Anneliese was committed to a psychiatric hospital, but only ended up staying for 1 week after her parents decided to take her out. While she was there, all she would do was scream or lay catatonic in the bed. She refused to eat, saying that the demons were strangling her. So then on May 9th, Joseph, Anna, and Peter came to bring her home. When they all arrived, Anneliese stiffened, and it took several men to bring her out to the car. This was clearly the wrong decision for Anneliese. She should have stayed at this hospital, and I think that that's been made clear. May and June went by. As Anneliese predicted, they were worse than ever. More exorcisms were held May 10th, 12th, 14th, and 17th, all of which the demons said nothing. As for Anneliese, one minute she'd be normal, and then the next minute she'd be totally crazy. She wouldn't eat or sleep, as she was completely emancipated, and her eyes went black and blue. She was injuring herself often and in different ways, hitting herself in the head, throwing herself at walls, punching her face, biting herself, rubbing her face against the wall. Only are some of the ways she was hurting herself. Through all of this, Anneliese was still working on her thesis, and with the help of Peter and her sisters, who would write down what Anneliese was dictating, she signed her paper and completed it on May 28, 1976. This is a quote from her thesis. "Let it here be noted that Jesus did not heal all the sick. As to the question why, it can only be said that for God, it all depends on the state of the soul of the person. Someone who is capable and willing to bear suffering and from whom God does not take it away, in the end will achieve more for himself than if he had never to bear the suffering." On May 30th, Father Alt's friend, Dr. Roth, heard the tapes and wanted to witness the exorcisms for himself. When the doctor arrived, Anneliese was bruised and swollen, and she had just finished chipping her tooth trying to bite through a wall. Father Alt suggested that maybe the doctor give her something to help with her pain, but the doctor was quoted saying there is no ejection against the devil. Later, while under oath, Dr. Roth denies any of this. Although she was very ill, she had moments of normalcy where her and Peter would discuss what this would all be like when it's over. And he would also ask if Anneliese should seek medical attention, and she would always refuse. Father Alt came to visit Anneliese again June 8th, where he found her condition just to be worse. She was looking ill and skinnier than ever, and this would be the last time that Father Alt will see Anneliese alive. Father Rince on June 9th held another exorcism. The demons did not speak, but yelled and screamed, while Anneliese pleaded, "I cannot go on." Father Rince says on this day that Anneliese made countless genuflections, sometimes up to 600 a day without stopping, and she wasn't eating or drinking and was looking extremely emancipated. June 30th, 1976 was the day of the 67th and last exorcism. Joseph, Anna, Roswitha, and Peter were all there. Father Rince did the exorcism, and during it, Anneliese said, "Please, absolution." Afterwards, Father Rince and Peter said goodbye, while Anna was asked to stay behind by Anneliese. Her last words being, "Mama, please stay with me, I'm afraid." July 1st, Joseph came into Anneliese's room around 7 a.m. before going to work to check on her. He left thinking that she was still asleep. An hour later, Anna would go and check on her and sees that she was not asleep like her father had thought. On July 1st, after 67 exorcisms and countless illnesses, Anneliese finally succumbed and died at the age of 23, weighing only 66 pounds. Anna rang Father Alt to tell him of Anneliese's untimely death, but he refused to believe it, thinking that it was the demons playing a trick. So he sent Father Rolf, who confirmed that Anneliese had in fact passed away. He's guessing around 6 a.m. that morning. Father Rolf, though, did not have any death certificates on him at the time, so they called in Dr. Keeler. When he arrived, he was just as horrified and was not convinced that this was natural causes. The author of one of the books that I got most of my information from made a really good point. If Dr. Roth had had the paperwork, and there's a really good chance that there would have never been any deeper investigation. But because Dr. Keeler wasn't sure if it was natural deaths or not, a criminal investigation was started. The media, of course, picked the story and took it off running. This started a nationwide debate around Anneliese. And that's the end of part 1. So I didn't have time to get everything that I wanted to say in one video, so I decided to split it up into 2 videos. This is going to be part 1. Part 2 is going to be talking about the trial, and then also talking about what I believe was actually going on with Anneliese. So if you want to see part 2, then subscribe, stick around, and we'll catch you for part 2.